What if one of the most feared plagues on Earth was not an end, but a beginning? Imagine a crisis so vast it darkens the sky. A living storm of billions of locusts, capable of devouring the food supply for millions of people in a single day. This was the terrifying reality that recently brought East Africa to its knees. The world responded with aid and advanced science, but it was like trying to stop a hurricane with a sheet of paper. The locusts, a biblical scourge supercharged by a modern climate crisis, seemed unstoppable. But then, the very people whose fields were being destroyed made a decision that shocked the world. They decided to stop fighting their enemy and start farming it. How could the ultimate symbol of famine be transformed into a source of nourishment? What does it take to look upon an agent of destruction and see a partner for survival? This is the story of a radical pivot, a journey from despair to ingenuity that is now changing how the world thinks about food, sustainability, and our relationship with nature itself. To understand the magnitude of this transformation, we first need to grasp the landscape of the crisis. Africa is a continent of breathtaking potential. It's home to over 1.5 billion people, and that number is growing fast. But beneath this surge of human potential lies a painful and persistent contradiction: chronic hunger. Today, over 300 million Africans face food insecurity every single day. Let that number sink in. That's 1 in every 5 people on the continent, a rate of hunger that is significantly higher than the global average. This crisis is particularly acute in East Africa. In Sudan, a nation once proudly known as the breadbasket of the region, more than 8 million people now live on the brink, with hundreds of thousands unsure of where their next meal will come from. Travel south to Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia, and the story is tragically similar. But here lies the paradox. East Africa is not naturally barren. Far from it. This is a land blessed with some of the most fertile soils on the planet, rich volcanic earth that is perfect for cultivation. It is watered by the legendary Nile River and the vast freshwater reservoir of Lake Victoria. So, what powerful forces conspired to turn this land of potential into a landscape of desperation? The answers are complex. Persistent conflict has shattered communities and turned productive fields into wastelands. Even in times of peace, critical infrastructure is lacking. A staggering 1/4 of all food grown in Africa is lost after harvest. It rots in the fields or in storage because of a simple lack of cold storage and reliable roads to get it to market. Imagine the frustration. Growing food only to watch it decompose while people go hungry just miles away. To fill this gap, African nations spend a collective $100 billion every year importing food, money that could otherwise build schools, hospitals, and sustainable local economies. And weaving through all these human-made challenges is the relentless pressure of a changing climate. Over the last 40 years, rainfall has dropped significantly. Temperatures have climbed, leading to 5 consecutive years of punishing drought. Rivers have shrunk, wells have run dry, and millions of acres of once fertile land have begun to turn to dust. The foundation of life was crumbling, and just when it seemed things couldn't get worse, nature decided to deliver its most formidable test. The stage was set at the end of 2019. A climatic dance between hot, dry winds from the Arabian desert and unprecedented cyclonic rains over the Indian Ocean created the perfect incubator. The conditions were ideal for the awakening of an ancient biological weapon, the desert locust. On its own, a desert locust is an unremarkable creature. It's a grasshopper, about 2 inches long, but this species has a secret, a dramatic transformation triggered by crowding. When their numbers reach a critical density, they change in behavior, color, and physiology. They become gregarious, social, and form the most destructive migratory swarms on the planet. A single swarm is a force of almost unstoppable nature. It can travel over 90 miles in a single day, riding the wind like a living tide. These are not random collections of insects. They are highly organized. They are, in essence, nature's most perfect plant-eating machines. They do not tire. They recognize no national borders. They are not constrained by seasons. Their only purpose is to eat, mate, and move on. These are the very creatures described in the book of Exodus as the 8th plague upon Egypt. The descriptions from thousands of years ago of skies darkening and every green thing being consumed are eerily identical to the scenes that began to unfold in the 21st century. The plague was back, but it was stronger, faster, and more widespread than ever before, supercharged by the very climatic extremes that had weakened the region. In the cracked, sun-baked earth of Somalia and Ethiopia, Millions of locust eggs, each female having laid up to 200 of them, began to hatch. The result was a population explosion of almost unimaginable scale. Within weeks, the skies themselves turned malevolent. The swarms moved like rolling black clouds, so dense they blotted out the sun. The sound was deafening, a constant low-frequency hum of countless wings beating in unison, a sound that drowned out the wind and the voices of terrified people. The statistics of their destruction are hard to comprehend. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization provides a chilling metric. A single, moderate-sized locust swarm, covering an area of just half a square mile, can consume in one day the same amount of food as 35,000 people. Now, multiply that by thousands. In Somalia, locusts devoured over 247,000 acres of rice fields, an area equivalent to the entire landmass of New York City. In Ethiopia, they destroyed 50,000 tons of grain, which would have been enough to bake 100 million loaves of bread. In Kenya, 170,000 acres of lush green fields were stripped absolutely bare, leaving behind a landscape of bare soil and chewed-up plant stalks. The most painful part of this catastrophe is that it was not a complete surprise. The FAO had issued stark warnings 9 months before the first major swarms took flight, but many East African nations, already strained by other challenges, simply did not have the basic tools to mount a preemptive defense. They lacked monitoring radar and crop-dusting aircraft. By the time the dark clouds appeared on the horizon, it was already far too late. The sense of powerlessness was absolute. As the fields were stripped bare, a profound question began to form. What if we can't stop them? What if we have to find another way? As the crisis escalated, the international community mobilized. The FAO, in partnership with governments like the United Kingdom, brought what seemed to be the perfect, environmentally friendly solution: a green weapon named Metarhizium acridum. This was not a harsh chemical pesticide. It was a specialized, naturally occurring fungus that is deadly to locusts, but harmless to other creatures. It works by attaching to the locust's body, germinating, and then growing through its exoskeleton. In theory, it was a biological miracle. A single application could be carried by the locusts themselves back into the swarm, spreading the disease for miles. The FAO estimated that if deployed correctly, this fungus could reduce locust populations by a staggering 90% in just 10 days. But theory and reality often collide. In East Africa, the reality was harsh and unforgiving. The miracle fungus had a critical, fatal weakness: it was delicate. To remain viable, it needed to be stored and transported in a consistent, refrigerated cold chain at temperatures below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. This single requirement became an insurmountable obstacle. How do you maintain a refrigerated supply chain across vast, remote regions where reliable electricity is a luxury? The logistical network was simply not there. Many storage depots were nothing more than corrugated tin shacks baking under the relentless sun. The result was a tragic waste. Hundreds of batches of this expensively procured, life-saving fungus simply died, rendered useless before they could ever be used. It was a devastating defeat for technology. While science had provided a tool, the fundamental infrastructure needed to wield it was missing. Billions of locusts survived, multiplied, and their range expanded exponentially. The people felt more powerless than ever. It was at this moment of absolute desperation that a radical, almost unthinkable idea began to take root. The idea was simple, yet to an outside observer, it seemed insane. What if we stopped trying to kill the locusts and started eating them instead? The logic, however, was born from a deep-seated resilience. Across many African cultures, insects are not a novelty. They are a traditional and nutritious part of the diet. Caterpillars, crickets, and termites are seasonal delicacies. In a context of extreme hunger, the line between pest and protein source begins to blur. When you are facing starvation, anything that can be chewed and swallowed becomes a potential lifeline. And so, a quiet, grassroots experiment began. People started going out into the fields not with pesticides, but with sacks. They began collecting the locusts that had devastated their crops. They developed simple methods to process them, sun-drying them, then grinding the brittle dried insects into a fine reddish-brown powder. This locust powder became a versatile kitchen staple. It was mixed into traditional maize porridge, adding a vital protein boost. It was baked into bread, blended with sorghum or wheat flour. These were simple, familiar meals, but now they were life-sustaining in a new way. They kept whole villages from the brink. The language around the locust began to change. The curses slowly turned into a new nickname, the green gold of the desert. And when researchers analyzed this green gold, what they found stunned the nutritional world. The data was unequivocal. Locusts are a nutritional superfood. Gram for gram, they contain twice as much protein as lean beef. A 100-gram serving of dried locust can contain up to 75 grams of pure protein. Compare that to chicken, which contains about 35 grams, or beef, which has around 30. The FAO concluded that a single pound of locust delivers the same protein punch as 2 pounds of beef, but the benefits go far beyond protein. Locusts are also packed with essential micronutrients: iron to combat anemia, zinc for immune systems, calcium for bones, and omega-3 fatty acids for brain health. These are precisely the nutrients that millions in the region desperately lack. Perhaps the most compelling argument, however, lies in their environmental footprint. Producing that pound of locust protein requires only 1/10 of the water and 1/10 of the land needed to produce a pound of beef protein. In a region plagued by drought and desertification, this efficiency is not just a statistic, it is a matter of survival. The paradigm had officially shifted. The locust was no longer just a pest to be eradicated. It was now a valuable mobile resource. The hunt was no longer an act of pest control, it was a harvest. This fundamental shift in perception opened the door for entrepreneurship. A new generation of African entrepreneurs saw an opportunity to build a business model around this crisis. One of the most prominent examples is a Kenyan startup called The Bug Picture. Their business was simple yet brilliant. They would create a market for locusts. They understood their product intimately. Locusts, being cold-blooded, are slaves to their environment. When the sun sets and temperatures plummet, their metabolisms slow to a crawl. They become sluggish, lethargic, and almost motionless. This behavioral quirk became the cornerstone of a new economy. In villages across the region, as darkness falls, a unique nighttime activity begins. Hundreds of people head out into the fields armed with sacks, plastic buckets, and the faint, dancing beams of flashlights. The scene is both surreal and inspiring. In the flickering light, hands move with practiced efficiency, quickly plucking the torpid insects from branches and the ground, tossing them into sacks that slowly fill and begin to rustle and rattle. It is a harvest of a most unusual crop. The Bug Picture established collection points, agreeing to buy every kilogram of captured locusts for about 35 cents. For a single person, a successful night's work can yield an income of $30 to $50. In rural East Africa, where many subsistence farmers live on the equivalent of $1 or $2 a day, this is a transformative sum of money. It can represent almost a month's worth of traditional income. For the first time, the locusts were putting real money in people's pockets, creating a powerful economic incentive to manage the swarms. The locusts are then transported to a processing facility. Here they are washed, sanitized, dried, and ground into a fine, pure protein powder. The value addition is remarkable. A metric ton of fresh locusts might be worth about $460 at the collection point. But after being processed into stable, shelf-ready protein powder, its value increases 5 to 7 times. This powder found multiple streams of revenue. It was packaged as a human food supplement, but its biggest market turned out to be in another, equally critical sector: animal feed. The locust crisis was not just a human tragedy, it was an agricultural catastrophe in the broadest sense. Across East Africa, over 30% of all livestock, the cows, goats, sheep, and chickens that are the backbone of rural livelihoods, depend on natural grazing. When the locust swarms stripped the land bare of vegetation, they obliterated the pastures that sustained these animals. The land, already stressed by years of drought, was left utterly barren. Herds of emaciated, bony cattle wandered for miles in a futile search for food and water. With rainy seasons becoming unreliable, the pastures had no chance to recover. The consequence was a massive die-off. In Kenya during the devastating drought of 2022, an estimated 2.5 million head of livestock perished. The economic loss was catastrophic, exceeding $800 million. For pastoralist communities, this wasn't just a financial loss, it was the loss of their entire savings and their future. It was at this desperate juncture that locust powder entered the scene as a kind of miracle feed. Agricultural research labs began running trials, mixing the protein-rich powder into standard animal feed. The results were extraordinary. Cows fed with locust-supplemented feed showed a 20% increase in milk production. Chickens laid 18% more eggs. For vulnerable young animals, the impact was even more dramatic. The mortality rate for baby goats dropped by nearly 30%. An FAO study highlighted another significant benefit: the potential for import substitution. They found that every ton of insect-based protein powder could replace 1.5 tons of imported fish meal, a common and expensive protein source in animal feed. This could save East African nations millions of dollars each year. A beautiful self-reinforcing closed-loop system had now fully emerged. The cycle was elegant and powerful. Locusts, caught by people, provide immediate food and income. Processed locusts become nutritious feed for livestock. Healthier livestock then provide more milk, meat, and eggs for the community. What was once a linear path to destruction had become a circular economy of survival. A few years after what people had begun to call the Great Locust Harvest, a remarkable thing happened. The locusts themselves began to disappear. Not to extinction, but their numbers plummeted to manageable levels. The relentless nightly hunting by thousands of people had become the most effective form of pest control imaginable. The environment began to heal. With the locust pressure dramatically reduced, crops recovered. Fields that had been bare once again turned a vibrant green. But success created a new and complex paradox. For many, the economic calculus had shifted. Catching locusts had proven to be more profitable and less labor-intensive than the uncertain business of farming. This led to a bold and risky new idea. What if we farmed the locusts? What if we created controlled facilities to breed them, ensuring a stable supply? It seemed like the next logical step. However, this proposal deeply worried FAO experts. Their warning was stark. The desert locust is arguably the most dangerous migratory pest on the planet. Farming them in captivity presented an existential risk. Just one broken pane of glass, one small tear in a net, and millions of breeding locusts could escape. The consequences of such an accident would be catastrophic. A single escaped population could explode into a new swarm covering dozens of square miles in a matter of weeks. This would no longer be a natural disaster, it would be a man-made apocalypse. Beyond this grave biological risk, there were still significant cultural barriers to overcome. In parts of Ethiopia, Uganda, and South Sudan, the consumption of insects is still viewed as unclean or taboo, influenced by certain religious and cultural interpretations. The path forward would require not just innovation, but also sensitive cultural dialogue. Just when it seemed the story of the locust could get no more transformative, another chapter was written, this one dealing with what was left behind. After the locusts were processed into powder, there were remains, the hard exoskeletons, the fragile wings, the dried body fragments. In a traditional economy, this would be waste. But in the new circular economy emerging from this crisis, entrepreneurs saw another opportunity. These remains, they discovered, were rich in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the NPK that is the holy trinity of plant growth. They began composting these leftovers into a potent, completely natural, organic fertilizer. According to data from the bug picture, just 1 ton of locust remains can be transformed into nearly 900 pounds of high-quality fertilizer. This is enough to rejuvenate about 2 acres of poor, depleted soil. In some of the driest regions where the soil was cracked and lifeless, farmers tried this insect fertilizer. What happened next was incredible. After just 1 growing season, crop yields surged by an average of 35%. The soil itself was transformed. It became darker and richer, capable of holding twice as much precious water. Most remarkably, wild native grasses began to grow again. A farmer named Hassan Ali summed it up. Before, we had to buy chemical fertilizer. It was expensive. Now I just use what nature gives for free. No more chemicals, no more waste. Everything goes back to nourishing life. Environmental experts call this the green cycle of Africa. It is a perfect closed-loop system where nothing is wasted. Locusts become protein powder. The powder feeds people and livestock. The inedible remains are returned to the earth as fertilizer. The fertilizer grows more food and restores the soil. What was once a symbol of destruction has become the very seed of rebirth. This remarkable story, born from desperation in the dry fields of East Africa, began to ripple across the world. What was once seen as a crazy experiment is fast becoming a global trend. In 2021, the European Union's Food Safety Authority gave its official approval for the use of desert locust protein in human food. In the Netherlands and Switzerland, major supermarket chains have begun selling insect-based burgers and protein bars. These products often boast a protein content of up to 40%, nearly double that of a conventional beef burger. In Japan, the retail giant Muji created a sensation by launching cricket ramen, noodles made with cricket powder which sold out in days. Consumers are waking up to the data. Insect protein is vastly more eco-friendly, requiring a fraction of the land and water. The model of using insects to process waste and create value is also spreading. In Singapore, the government has invested in a facility that uses black soldier fly larvae to recycle tons of organic waste daily into animal feed and fertilizer, a high-tech version of Africa's green cycle. What began as a survival mechanism is now a burgeoning global industry. Technologies that were once confined to labs are now the foundation of a market valued at over $3 billion. Startups in the United States, Europe, and China are all racing to innovate, but few know that this story truly began in Africa, where people first learned to turn their disaster into life. When we talk about the future of food, we often imagine high-tech labs and artificial intelligence. But what if the future is simpler and more ancient than that? What if it is being shaped by the hands of Kenyan, Ethiopian, and Somali farmers, the first people to see profound potential in a tiny, terrifying locust? Places once synonymous with destruction are now becoming symbols of nature's incredible capacity for rebirth. They have authored a masterclass in resilience, learning to turn disaster into hope, enemies into resources, and despair into a blueprint for the future. This story forces us to ask a profound question. If humanity can learn to work with nature in this way, to find solutions not in fighting our challenges but in understanding and integrating them, should we still fear climate change? Or can we begin to see it as the ultimate catalyst for the innovation we so desperately need? The people of East Africa didn't just survive a plague, they redefined it. They showed us that the answer to our biggest problems might not be to conquer nature, but to learn from its cycles and adapt. So we are left with a final question for us all. Is embracing nature's intelligence, even in its most frightening forms, the only way for humanity to build a truly sustainable and prosperous future on Earth? What do you think? If you believe that resilience and ingenuity can change the world, and that the most powerful stories are those of transformation, then we invite you to join our community, subscribe to our channel, because the world is full of extraordinary stories of adaptation and hope waiting to be discovered. This is just the beginning.